I watched Querelle and I couldn't stop thinking about how ferocious and unapologetically horny this thing looked. The advertising alone is just a shoved in your face. Sailors, heat, murder, sex, giant stone jutting out of walls as set decoration in a port town built like a Bathhouse Fantasy, men wanting each other with a sex-starved hunger ready to launch at one another, and it all centers on one man, Querelle, played by Brad Davis. I was excited to watch something that was going to be hot, but the film does something I did not expect, and I realized that my frustration might actually be the point.
I don't give a As far as I'm concerned, you're all there is.
Before I even watched the film, I went looking for the poster online and found 9 different covers. The one I associate with Querelle promises pure erotic thriller. Turns out to be the least accurate representation of what the movie actually is. The German version looks like a delicate watercolor sketch and makes me think European art house. The modern reissue is oversaturated and glittery, like it's gonna be some campy gay classic. Then the Criterion cover, which I genuinely thought was AI generated, which must have been a common critique the artist was getting because he had to post that it was not AI generated. There's no animation in this movie. I don't know why they went with this cover. The covers that might actually represent the film better, with text that reads, "Fassbinder's last and most controversial film. It will take you into a surreal world of passion and sexuality." That one at least admits it's going to be weird and controlled. Nobody knows what to do with this thing. Is it sexy? Is it a thriller? High art? Exploitation? Watching it, I felt that same confusion. Querelle steps off the ship into a port that looks like a wet dream. Men everywhere, sailors and dock workers with tight clothes and open shirts, and heads straight to Leferia, the notorious bar and brothel run by Nono and his wife, Lysian. Robert is Querelle's brother. They embrace, then they exchange slow, repeated punches to the belly. Also, later in the movie, they get into a choreographed knife fight that reminded me of crabs fighting.
Hey, this is our spot. Go on, get out of here.
I didn't know what was going on between them. It was somewhere between erotic and absurd how they interact with each other. Querelle arranges to sell opium through Nono. He enlists a fellow sailor, Vic, to help with the deal. They're arguing about sex between men. The tension escalates. Querelle stabs him, slits his throat. And then Querelle digs another wound into Vic and kisses him on the cheek. This was another scene where I was like, what the is going on? Then the dice game happens at Leferia. There's a rule that any man who wants to sleep with Lysian must first roll the dice with Nono. If you win, you get Lysian. If you lose, Nono you. Now, let's not just brush past that. We're going to repeat the rules so the sheer logistics of this establishment really sink in. In this town of cobblestone and sailors, the penalty for losing a game of dice is a mandatory sexual encounter with the house. And I was so shocked at how casually the movie treats this. Is this just the tax you pay for a night out in this port? I can only imagine what the Yelp reviews are like for this place. And so Querelle knows the rules and chooses to rig the dice so he'll lose. He doesn't even want to risk it. And he's like, well, guess you gotta me. What is this behavior? The scene that follows is the most explicit in the film. Querelle bent over a desk, Nono behind him. There's this orange tungsten lighting that makes their skin look hot. Sweat is dripping down both Querelle and Nono's noses. And I thought, okay, we're at this temperature now. It's gonna get more and more sexually explicit as the movie went on. I'm over here like Querelle with the dice. Well, I guess I just have to watch these sailors for 2 hours against my will. Wasn't my intention. I came for the art. Later, there's a scene where Querelle reaches into a policeman's unzipped fly and him off against an alley wall. That's kind of it. The Nono scene is the peak sexual moment, and I felt the movie was keeping me at arm's length for the rest of the runtime. And boy, was I disappointed. Watching this movie for the first time, everyone looks ready to but no one ever does anything that feels real. I kept waiting for things to come to life and escalate, but every moment that should have built to something kept resetting to the same temperature. Every charge I felt in the first 20 minutes stayed there until I started losing interest. I was so curious about the making of and the behind the scenes of this movie that I went to the Central Library downtown. They had a huge variety of Fassbinder and Davis biographies. I had never been before, and I was excited for the opportunity, but every book that I wanted to check out was a reference copy, which meant that they could only be read at the library. So I spent a good, I'm not exaggerating here, 5 hours just reading about these guys. We're gonna get into a bit of the behind the scenes of what I learned, and I want to start with how my frustrations about the movie itself kind of match the frustration Brad Davis also felt. The film was originally 3 hours long. Guman, a financier, insisted on cutting it down to 1 hour and 45 minutes. In Bluestein's biography, Brad said, everything that makes sense has been cut out. Now, it looks like this guy just gets off the boat and starts killing people and getting f***ed. What was cut out? What would have made Querelle's choices feel motivated instead of random? And the railings, I need you to understand, are literally just giant stone dicks. Fassbinder looked at the harbor set and said, needs more and the set designer took it to heart. I've seen more restrained design choices on products at the pleasure chest than I did in this movie. I was so frustrated because Fassbinder built a fantasy. He shows you the port, the stone, the men, and then he films sex scenes like they're being directed by someone who's never had an orgasm before. If it's not gonna be hot, at least let me care about someone. Let me connect to somebody. But it wouldn't give me that either. Everything about the set looks expensive, and it was. Brad Davis was paid $20,000 a week for a total of $60,000 for only 22 days of work. But the mental cost was higher. Brad wrote in his notebook, "Do I have anything to offer besides sex?" I guess I've always felt that was my chief attribute and contribution. I'm finally offered a play, and what is my part? The yug stud in black leather pants and a white t-shirt that makes people cream at a glance. How long, O Lord? When can I just act? Free of the stud for hire tab clipped on me when that tag was as true as anything about me, but not anymore. Brad spent years being cast as sex, not as an actor with range. The biography notes the challenge of working with a German-speaking, heroin-taking director. And those challenges were immediate. Ronald Hyman's biography documents what happened in the week before shooting. Brad was understandably nervous, especially about the homosexual love scenes he would have to play, and he turned up for dinner every night, expecting to be taken aside for a briefing about the character. When Brad tried to start a conversation in English, Fassbinder would say in German, "Tell him to eat his foot and not talk." The night before shooting started, Brad went to producer Dieter Schiedor. "This man hasn't spoken one word to me," Brad said. Schiedor pleaded with Fassbinder, who eventually promised he would speak to Davis. All Fassbinder said to him was, "I'm not going to ask anything of you that you can't do as an actor." Brad became an icon of desire through a performance that had been stripped of whatever depth he fought for. But Fassbinder was already gone, mentally, and then literally. Fassbinder directed over 40 feature-length films in just 13 years. He was already shooting his next project before critics could praise or denounce the previous work. Heyman describes Fassbinder pretty brutally as a frightened little boy hiding inside the arrogant director persona, someone who found it an enormous strain to put on a show of aggressive self-confidence. Fassbinder traveled with large groups of people because he felt protected. He was not having to face the world on his own. He would direct actors by tearing them down. That's what he liked, just to make them cry, and then he would build them up again. He could destroy, and then, 2 minutes later, he felt pity. Then he just embraced you and said, "Well, I didn't mean it like that." In Robert Katz's biography, he describes Fassbinder at an earlier Cannes appearance looking like he'd slept in his clothes, treating the money man and high-end hotels with physical disgust. He was flicking his furry hand at the wrist, the way you'd shake muck from your fingers, like the whole pristine world around him made his skin crawl. Are we seeing a pattern here? Beautiful things that Fassbinder has disgust for? And maybe that disgust for lavish, fake, untouchable beauty is exactly what he was building into Querelle. A port so perfect, it feels sterile. Men so beautiful, they don't feel real. I went into this movie expecting erotica, and it wasn't until I learned more about Jean Genet, the author of the original novel, that I understood this source material comes from a place of theology. Genet was abandoned at birth, raised by foster parents. By the time he was 10, he was stealing. And when he got caught, when they called him a thief, something shifted. He wrote, "I think that the word thief wounded me deeply, deeply enough to make me want, deliberately, to be what other people made me blush for being, to want to be it proudly, and in spite of them." He was also gay. So now he's a thief and a homosexual, two of the worst things you could be at the time. And instead of trying to prove society wrong, he leaned all the way in. Fine, you say I'm the lowest of the low, then I'll go lower. I'll steal, I'll f men. I'll write about criminals and prostitutes and murderers like they're saints. And here's something to complicate things even more. Katz writes that Fassbinder wanted to be Marilyn Monroe. He wanted to walk down a staircase wearing feathers and a gown. Here he was directing hyper-masculine sailors, while on the flip side, he is enamored by feeling like this tragic feminine figure. I feel like the movie Querelle is about that gap. Who you feel like inside versus what you show the world.
Tell me, is he a master of his craft?
What's so interesting about it for you? Gets you all excited, doesn't it? Maybe you'd like a little taste of it yourself.
Why not, if it's nice?
Hollywood has always policed this gap.
John Wayne ever make a pass at you? Was he supposed to? What kind of a
I don't know. Someone just
question?
held that up on a card to be sure and ask you, and they said he's got a great story here about the time in the back seat of a car.
Wayne was furious that Douglas had played Vincent van Gogh in Lust for Life. "We've got to play strong, tough characters," Wayne said, "not those weak queers." Douglas responded, "I'm an actor. I like to play interesting roles. It isn't real. You're not really John Wayne, you know. You perform the armor or you're accused of what's underneath." Wayne couldn't admit that masculinity is a performance like Kirk Douglas did, as it threatens this entire structure. Jean Genet described Querelle like a young boy whose soul is visible in his eyes. A metamorphosis into an alligator and a princess. Fassbinder simplified it in his screenplay to say that he was a boy whose soul had changed into an alligator. That combination of an armored alligator and a princess in a royal gown with a massive train behind her, that's what Querelle does. He turned his beautiful self into something you can look at but can't reach. That matters very much to Lieutenant Sablon, the ship captain who's been watching Querelle through doorways and shadows since the film began. Franco Nero plays him as desperate, hungry, barely holding himself together. He wants Querelle with a kind of need that just feels pathetic. Everyone wants Querelle, and Querelle can just stand there, completely indifferent. And these men are slipping on their own drool. I did care about Querelle, but not in an empathetic way. I cared in that I was really jealous of how beautiful he is. How men seem to lust after him without him doing anything to earn it. The way his body fits into that tight little tank top. Guys just walk up to him and express interest. Recently I matched with this guy and we were trying to make plans for a first date. He gives me his number and I'm like, amazing. But then I wake up the next morning to a text from him asking, before our first date, if we could FaceTime to see how the vibe is. And I can't describe the level of frustration I went through. That is what a first date is, sir, to see if there is a vibe. Like, you are so unconvinced that I'm worth an hour of your time that you want to set up a pre-screening. With Querelle, he doesn't have to approach anyone. He doesn't have to go through the process of a pre-screening. Everyone just wants him. I kept thinking, at what point does wanting someone become pathetic? Where a person almost becomes repellent for how badly they want it. Toady calls Sablon essentially a frustrated rather than a practicing homosexual. He writes about him in his journal, he watches him constantly, and he wants Querelle to look at him the way everyone looks at Querelle. And it suggests that Sablon's longing survives precisely because it's unfulfilled, and that it rapidly disappears once it is fulfilled. I feel like I get Sablon now, where I want someone and I want them to want me back, and that's thrilling, and then once it's achieved, something switches off and the attraction just leaves. Sablon gets Querelle in the end, and I wonder if it's worth it.
Ich finde das schon komisch, dass du mir keine Opernkarte besorgt hast.
Wieso?
Wir machen doch sonst auch immer alles zusammen.
Aber mein Liebling, du verstehst doch sowieso nichts davon. Du langweilst dich doch bloß. Außerdem singen die Italienisch.
Ach so.
Eben.
7 years before Querelle, Fassbinder made another film about gay men. In 1975, he played a working-class lottery winner who's slowly dismantled by his refined boyfriend in Fox and his friends. It was a cynical look at how the queer community can be just as classist and exploitative as any other circle. This era established him as a provocateur. Films like The Bitter Tears of Petra von Kant were famous for being difficult and emotionally cruel, but they showed his obsession with a single theme. The idea that in every relationship, someone is the master and someone is the slave. By the time he got to Querelle in 1982, that grounded realism was gone. He moved the production entirely onto his soundstage, creating a hyper-stylized, orange-hued world that looked more like a dream or a purgatory than a real place. The move indoors felt like a retreat. Fassbinder was working at a frantic pace, fueled by a heavy mix of drugs and alcohol. It was clear he was burning out, pushing his body to stay upright long enough to finish the vision. That pressure fell directly on Brad Davis. Coming off Midnight Express, Davis gave a performance that was raw and completely exposed. But as the edit came together, the tragedy of the story started to bleed into real life. Fassbinder died 3 months before the movie premiered at Cannes, 9 days after his 37th birthday. Cause of death? Accidental overdose of cocaine and sleeping pills. Brad Davis was left to represent the film alone, but Davis had his own clock running. Shortly after the release, he was diagnosed with HIV. His wife Susan later wrote about the years when we lived with lies and secrecy, the terrible silence we lived with during our, Brad's, years-long struggle with AIDS. He lived in total secrecy for 6 years because, as she put it, if an actor is even rumored to have HIV, he does not work. When the time came, it seemed Brad was ready, and he wanted control over his final act by choosing assisted suicide, a tragic mirror to the doomed, beautiful world Fassbinder had built for him. This movie. If you can't tell, I got really absorbed by the makings of it. And it took so much outside research for me to understand, or at least interpret the themes Fassbinder was going for, and the struggles Fassbinder, Davis, Genet went through. And I wish more of that human struggle was actually in the movie Querelle. I give Querelle a 4 out of 10, and I know that's harsh. It's technically accomplished, but I feel there is a profound disconnect between the high-stakes reality of the people making it and the film itself. Part of me is grateful a film where gay desire unapologetically exists on screen, but it lacks heart and it lacks heat. And I've talked about cruising in the past, and I'd argue that Querelle is an even more extreme example of gay men being portrayed as predators. But because the plot and story and themes are so convoluted, it's hard to even get in there to argue about anything. I don't need my representation to be heroic or good, but I do need it to feel alive. Querelle is the ultimate alligator. He's covered in those scales Fassbinder and Genet talked about to protect himself. And that armor makes it impossible to find a pulse. It's like trying to have a conversation with a marble statue. It's beautiful and perfectly formed, but it's a dead weight that doesn't care that you're in the room. By the final act, I was just bored and exhausted. The movie didn't seem to care whether I was interested anymore, so I eventually stopped caring too. So that's Querelle. I'd love to hear from you, especially on that question on when wanting becomes pathetic, or your thoughts on me shutting down the date before it even happened. Navigating desire, attraction as a gay man in your 30s in the 21st century is quite a confusing experience, at least for me. So thank you for watching. I appreciate your comments and advice, and I'll see you in the next movie review.